I want you out of my house now. Get out!
How can you do this to me?
Please, don't make me leave.
Her husband threw her onto the street like trash.
He didn't just ask her to leave. He opened the door, tossed her bag onto the pavement, and told her not to come back. No money, no home, no apology. The woman he once promised to protect was treated like something disposable. Hours later, with nowhere left to go, she stepped into a quiet bank branch, hands shaking, pride bruised, holding the only thing she had left, her dead grandmother's old card. The moment it touched the counter, the screens went dark. The smiles vanished. The room fell silent. Then a phone rang behind glass, and the CEO's voice came through, low and stunned. "We've been waiting for you. Stay until the end." Because what they hid from her was bigger than betrayal. Emily's life didn't fall apart slowly. It collapsed in minutes. There was no argument, no shouting, no final conversation that could be replayed later, searching for meaning. Her husband stood near the door, calm and distant, as if he were returning a defective item instead of ending a marriage. Her bags hit the ground first. Then the words followed, cold, rehearsed, already decided. "Leave. Don't come back." Before she could ask why, the door shut. Before she could breathe, the lock clicked. Emily stood there, stunned, staring at the door that had once been her home. The place where she cooked meals. The place where she believed promises. The place where she thought she was safe. She checked her phone. The bank app showed zero access. Her joint account, frozen. Her credit, canceled. No savings. No job. No emergency plan. And no one to call. Her parents were gone. Friends had drifted away after the wedding. The only family who ever truly protected her, her grandmother, had been buried years ago, along with the quiet wisdom Emily had taken for granted. Rain began to fall, thin at first, then heavier. People passed by. Shoes splashed. Umbrellas opened. No one stopped. Emily pulled her coat tighter, feeling smaller with every second. It wasn't just the cold sinking into her bones. It was the realization settling in her chest. This wasn't a sudden decision. The frozen accounts, the lack of explanation, the speed with which she was erased. They had planned this. The man she married hadn't just abandoned her. He had prepared for her disappearance. And as Emily stood on the sidewalk, drenched and shaking, one terrifying thought became impossible to ignore. She wasn't just thrown out. She was meant to vanish. Night came quietly, but it brought no comfort. Emily sat on a cold bus stop bench, her suitcase beside her, rainwater pooling around her shoes. Every few minutes, she checked her phone, even though she already knew the truth. No notifications, no missed calls, no sudden reversals of fate, just silence. She reached into her bag and pulled out the last thing she hadn't dared to touch all day, an old, wrinkled envelope. The paper was yellowed, the edges soft, like it had been handled many times and then carefully put away. Her grandmother's handwriting curved across the front in blue ink. Asterisk for Emily. Only if you ever have nowhere left to go. Asterisk. Emily swallowed hard. Her grandmother had given it to her years ago, pressing it into her hand with an unusual seriousness. At the time, Emily had laughed it off. "I'm fine, Grandma," she'd said. "I won't need this." Her grandmother had smiled, but it hadn't reached her eyes. "Promise me," she'd replied, squeezing Emily's fingers. "You'll open it only when the world forgets your value." Emily had promised. Now, sitting in the dark with nowhere to sleep and nothing left to lose, she realized how carefully her grandmother had chosen those words. Her hands trembled as she slid a finger under the flap. Inside was no letter, no instructions, no explanation, just a bank card. Old, thicker than modern cards. Its surface dull, scratched by time. The logo wasn't one she recognized. The numbers weren't raised. It looked almost forgotten, like something that belonged in a drawer, not a wallet. Emily turned it over. On the back, written in the same familiar blue ink, was a single sentence. "Use only when the world forgets your value." Her throat tightened. She didn't expect wealth. She didn't expect rescue. At that moment, miracles felt insulting. All she hoped for, quietly, desperately, was enough money for a meal. Maybe a cheap motel room. Maybe one night where she could sleep without fear. The next morning, after washing her face in a public restroom and smoothing her hair as best she could, Emily stood across the street from a bank branch. The building looked ordinary. Glass doors, neutral colors, people walking in and out with coffee cups and briefcases. She almost turned away. What if the card was expired? What if it was meaningless? What if this last thread snapped too? But hunger and exhaustion pushed her forward. Inside, the air was warm. Calm. Too calm for someone whose life had collapsed. Emily waited in line, clutching the card so tightly her palm ached. When her turn came, she slid it across the counter with a quiet apology. I'm not sure this still works, she said. I just need to check the balance. The teller smiled politely, the way people do when they expect disappointment. She inserted the card. Then she frowned. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. She tried again. The screen flickered once, then went blank. Just a moment, the teller said, her smile stiffening. A supervisor approached, then another employee. Whispers passed behind the counter. Screens dimmed. A soft alert chimed, once then stopped abruptly. The casual hum of the bank changed. People stopped typing. Phones were picked up, then set down. Eyes lifted toward Emily, not curious but cautious. One of the staff members swallowed and said, "Ma'am, where did you get this card?" Emily's heart pounded. "It was my grandmother's," she answered honestly. "She passed away." The supervisor nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd been afraid was true. "Please," he said, his voice suddenly careful, "have a seat." Emily sat. Minutes passed. 10, maybe 15. She considered standing up and leaving before security arrived, before embarrassment finished what her husband had started. Then a phone rang behind the glass office upstairs. A man stepped out, older, sharply dressed, his expression stripped of color. He looked at Emily as if he'd recognized her face from a photograph long memorized. And before she could speak, before anyone else could breathe, he said quietly, "She's here." For the first time since the door had locked behind her, Emily felt something stir beneath the fear. Not certainty, not safety, but hope. The moment the teller swiped the card, the bank stopped breathing. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a subtle change. A pause that lingered a second too long. The screen flickered once, then flashed red. Not an error message, not a decline. Something else. The teller's polite smile faded as her fingers froze above the keyboard. She tried again, slower this time, as if gentleness might fix whatever had gone wrong. Instead, the screen went completely black. Behind her, another monitor lit up red. Then another. A low, unfamiliar tone echoed softly through the bank, cut off almost as soon as it began. Phone stopped ringing. Keyboards went silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Emily felt every eye in the room shift toward her, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition. The teller swallowed. "Just a moment, ma'am." She stood up too quickly, nearly knocking her chair back, and hurried toward the supervisor's desk. Their voices dropped into urgent whispers, heads bent together. One of them glanced at Emily, then away again, as if eye contact might break some invisible rule. Emily's chest tightened. "I shouldn't have come," she thought. This was a mistake. A man in a dark suit appeared from a side office, his expression tense. He checked the screen, then the car details, then asked the question that sent a ripple through the staff. "Did she give a name?" The teller nodded. "The account holder, it's under Margaret Hale." The man's face drained of color. Another employee whispered, almost reverently, "That can't be right." Emily's heart began to pound. "That was my grandmother," she said softly, her voice sounding too loud in the stillness. "She raised me." No one answered her. Instead, the supervisor straightened, smoothed his tie with shaking hands, and spoke into a phone held close to his mouth. "Yes, sir," he said. "She's here. In person." He listened, nodded once, then hung up. The room remained frozen. Then he turned to Emily, his tone completely changed, no longer polite, no longer professional. Careful, respectful. "Ma'am," he said, "the CEO would like to see you immediately." The words didn't make sense. Emily blinked. I just wanted to check the balance." "I understand," he replied gently. But this requires direct attention. Security didn't escort her. Instead, doors opened. She was guided past glass offices, past restricted areas she didn't know existed, into an elevator that required a key card and a code. No one spoke as it ascended. The silence pressed against her ears. When the doors opened, she stepped into a different world. Thick carpets, muted lighting, walls lined with old photographs. Men in suits, handshakes captured in black and white, newspaper headlines framed like trophies. And at the center of it all, a large office with floor-to-ceiling windows. The CEO stood when she entered. He was older, silver-haired, with eyes sharp enough to cut through stone. But when he looked at Emily, something flickered across his face. Not dominance. Respect. "You look just like her," he said quietly. Emily's throat tightened. "My grandmother?" He nodded. "Margaret Hale wasn't just an account holder," he said. "She was a force." He gestured for her to sit, then remained standing himself, as if sitting would be inappropriate. "Your grandmother founded one of the earliest private investment trusts this institution ever managed," he continued. "But she did it quietly. No press, no recognition. She believed power should move unseen." Emily shook her head. "That's not possible. She lived in a small house. She wore the same coat for years." "Yes," he said softly, "because she chose to." He tapped a file on his desk and slid it toward her. Inside were documents Emily could barely comprehend. Holdings, assets, accounts layered within accounts. Numbers so large they felt unreal. "But there's more," the CEO added, his expression darkening. "Years ago, portions of your grandmother's trust were illegally transferred, hidden, buried under shell entities. Someone assumed there would be no heir to ask questions." Emily's breath caught. Someone stole from her. "They didn't just steal money," he said. "They stole control." He leaned forward. "Your grandmother knew this day might come. That's why the card exists. It's not just access, it's a key. When it's used, every system freezes. Every flag is raised. Every hidden ledger is forced into the open." Emily's hands trembled as she closed the file. "So she knew," she whispered. "She planned," the CEO replied. "And she waited." He met Emily's eyes, his voice steady. "The moment that card was swiped, it told us one thing. The rightful heir has arrived." Emily thought of the rain, the locked door, the man who believed she had nothing. All along, the power hadn't been lost. It had been sleeping, and now it was awake. The truth should have brought relief. It didn't. Instead, it brought tension, thick, suffocating, and alive. From the moment Emily left the CEO's office, something in the building felt wrong. Smiles were tighter. Conversations stopped when she passed. Doors that had opened effortlessly before now closed a second too quickly. Power, she learned, was only welcomed when it stayed silent. The board meeting was called within hours. Emily wasn't invited, but she was mentioned. She knew because the CEO told her, his voice low, careful, as if even the walls might be listening. "Some people are unsettled by your presence," he said. Unsettled was a polite word. Board members who had sat comfortably for decades suddenly demanded audits, emergency reviews, clarifications. The same people who had signed off on the old trust documents now claimed confusion, memory loss, missing paperwork. Files began to disappear, not metaphorically, physically. A locked archive room was found open one morning, shelves half empty. Digital backups showed access logs that didn't exist the day before. Dates changed, names removed, including Margaret Hale's. Emily watched it happen in real time, the truth being erased again, but this time she could see the hands doing it. One man didn't look away. His name was Daniel Moore, mid-level compliance officer. Quiet, meticulous. The kind of man who followed rules not because he feared consequences, but because he believed in order. He approached Emily late one afternoon, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your grandmother didn't lose control of her assets," he said. "They were taken, slowly, carefully, by people who knew the system better than she ever let on." Emily's stomach tightened. "Do you have proof?" Daniel nodded. "I'm not supposed to, but I copied what I could before it started disappearing." He handed her a small flash drive. I don't think I should keep this, he added. And neither should you. But you need to know, this wasn't random. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, because of patterns. The frozen accounts, the speed of her eviction, the way her husband hadn't argued, hadn't needed to. It all felt prepared. The next morning, Daniel didn't show up for work. At first, they said he was sick. By noon, his desk was cleared. By evening, his employee record no longer existed. No goodbye email, no termination notice, no explanation, just absence. Emily felt the warning settle into her bones. This wasn't a legal battle. It was a purge. She returned to the documents the CEO had shared, this time reading them not as numbers, but as stories. Transactions tied to shell companies. Shell companies tied to family trusts. And one name, a name she recognized, her ex-husband's last name. Her hands began to shake. She dug deeper, cross-referencing timelines. Corporate filings. Old donations masked as philanthropy. Legal entities dissolved just as investigations began decades ago. The deeper she went, the clearer it became. Her grandmother hadn't just been powerful. She had been dangerous to the wrong people. Margaret Hale had challenged a financial circle that believed itself untouchable. Old families, quiet influence, power passed down like inheritance, protected by silence and loyalty. And one of those families was the family Emily had married into. The room felt smaller as the realization hit her fully. Her marriage hadn't been love. It had been access. Her husband hadn't found her by chance. He had been placed. Emily remembered the subtle questions he used to ask about her grandmother's past, her finances, old letters she dismissed as sentimental. The way he'd insisted on joint accounts. The way he'd handled paperwork to help. And then, the timing. The day the last dormant safeguard in Margaret Hale's trust was scheduled to activate. Emily was thrown out. Cleanly. Efficiently. Completely. They hadn't just wanted her gone. They wanted her unarmed. But Margaret Hale had planned for betrayal. She always had. Hidden within the trust was a final clause. One that transferred not just assets, but authority. The moment the card was used, oversight shifted. Independent auditors were triggered. Legal protections activated across jurisdictions. The kind of protection you only build if you expect retaliation. When the board learned this, panic set in. Not fear of Emily. Fear of exposure. Meetings grew heated. Voices were raised behind closed doors. Lawyers were summoned. Old alliances cracked under pressure. And then the threats started. Anonymous calls. Warnings disguised as advice. Let professionals handle this. Don't dig where you don't belong. One message stood out. Asterisk your grandmother paid the price for curiosity. Don't repeat her mistake. Asterisk. Emily stared at the words. Her reflection faint in the dark screen. For the first time since the rain-soaked sidewalk, she understood the truth completely. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't misfortune. This was a cover-up that had lasted decades. And now, they knew she was awake. They knew she had the key. Daniel Moore was gone. Files were vanishing. The people responsible were circling. Emily closed her laptop slowly, her pulse steady despite the danger. They thought she was alone. They thought fear would send her running. They were wrong. Because Emily wasn't just her ex-husband's discarded wife. She was Margaret Hale's granddaughter. And if they believed the story ended with her grandmother, they were about to learn how inheritance really works. Not in money, but in resolve. And this time, Emily wasn't disappearing. She was coming for the truth. The threats didn't arrive loudly. They came in envelopes without return addresses. In legal notices written to intimidate, not inform. In whispers that followed Emily into rooms she hadn't known were watching her. Her name appeared in court filings before it appeared in headlines. Accusations wrapped in careful language. Claims designed to exhaust her, to drain time and courage the same way her grandmothers had been drained years before. They were trying to bury her in process, the way they had buried Grace. That was when Emily learned the truth about her grandmother's final days. Not from family records or memorial speeches, but from sealed testimony uncovered by the auditors Margaret Hale had activated long ago. Grace hadn't been defeated. She had been silenced, threatened with lawsuits, public humiliation. the quiet destruction of everything she built if she spoke too loudly. So she did what powerful women of her generation were forced to do. She went quiet, not weak, strategic. Emily felt the weight of that legacy settle on her shoulders, not as fear, but as clarity. She stopped reacting, stopped answering threats with panic, stopped trying to explain herself to people who already knew the truth. Instead, she documented every call, every filing, every vanished record. She built her case the way her grandmother had built her fortune, slowly, invisibly, and with precision. When the media finally came, expecting tears and chaos, they found none. Emily didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't perform pain for sympathy. She sat straight, spoke clearly, and let the facts do what emotion never could. At night, when doubt crept in, she remembered the last real conversation she'd had with her grandmother, one she hadn't understood at the time. "The people afraid of your power," Grace had said softly, "are the ones who relied on you never finding it." Emily finally understood. Her husband had relied on her being small. The board had relied on her being uninformed. The families who stole had relied on silence lasting forever. So Emily stood, not with anger, not with revenge, with presence. Court dates came and went. Claims collapsed under evidence. Auditors released findings that couldn't be reburied. Names once untouchable were suddenly spoken aloud. Her ex-husband disappeared from her life the same way he had tried to erase her, quietly and without dignity. Emily didn't watch. She was too busy reclaiming what had never truly been taken. In the end, she didn't win because she was louder. She won because she refused to stay invisible. And somewhere, beyond courtrooms and boardrooms, Grace Hale's final lesson lived on. Not in the money, not in the power, but in the woman who finally learned how to stand inside it. Emily lost her marriage, her home, her sense of safety. But in the ruins, she found something far greater. Her voice, her legacy, her power. They thought erasing her grandmother would erase the truth. They thought breaking her would keep it buried. They were wrong, because what they awakened wasn't anger. It was resolve. Emily didn't rise loudly. She rose permanently, and she will finish what Grace started, not with vengeance, but with truth. Because when quiet women finally stand where they were meant to kneel, entire systems fall.